And while it does that, I'm going to let our audience in, admit all, and disable the waiting room. And as everyone gets loaded in, thank you so much for joining us for this speaker panel. This is our third speaker panel, and they just keep getting better and better. It has been a joy to be part of the summit and to be joined by such talented and wonderful designers and all of you who the energy that is in the community is incredible. There you are, Celine. Let me add you. Um, it wasn't I was typing CE and it wasn't picking it up because of the accent on your E. So we have some lovely, wonderful, very, very talented designers joining us here. And this is our speaker panel, Designer Roundtable. And we're going to share how we go about our creative process, how we go from swatch to publication. And before we dive in, I want to give our speakers a chance to introduce themselves, share a little bit about who they are, what they do, and anything else that you'd like to share. I guess I have to call on people, right? Let's start with Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Lampin. I design under the name Synaptic Stitches, and that is a combination of my background that before I was a knitwear designer, I was a neuroscientist. Um, I'm a big old nerd, and I also really love knits that are super engaging and always like learning something new with every new project. I'm always trying to like find a new way to do something with each new design that like keeps my brain active. So I'm always then teaching my knitter something new because if I haven't tried it before, I have not given it to you to do before. Um, and I love um, brioche and cables, my two favorite things. So that's why my presentation was on brioche cables, and it's one of my favorite things to design with.
And Bronwyn just shared in the chat, she said today is National STEM Day, I believe.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
And she loves nerds. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for sharing, Beth. Jen, I'm going to go around the order I see on my screen. So let's talk to Beth next. Let's hear from Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth. I design under things Beth makes because I used to make more stuff than just knitting, but I've never bothered to change the name. Um, I do mostly small accessories with very large shawls thrown in that kind of double as blankets. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say. Never
That's
good at introducing myself.
ah, that's perfect. We just want to know who you are, where we can find you, all of that stuff. So things Beth makes is perfect. At the end, I'll have you all add your links in the chat because right now they're just going to get lost and buried. So, and Crystal, I see you next on my screen.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Crystal Hyatt. I design under Factory Girl Design. I'm based in Minnesota. And as far as designing goes, I love to design color work, which was my presentation. And then cables is another favorite of mine. But I really also focus on inclusive knitwear. Being a plus size person, I really got into designing because at the time, there weren't a lot of patterns at that time for my size, so I wanted to make sure that I could knit for myself, and that just kind of snowballed into designing for myself and for others too. So it just kind of grew from there. In addition to this is my like part-time side hustle gig keeps me creative. My day-to-day job, I run a manufacturing business, so I'm hence the factory girl. I have been a factory girl my entire life, always working in manufacturing. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh, I love that. I didn't realize that about you. Next on my screen, I see Holly.
Hi there, I'm Holly Yo. I've been designing for over 20 years now, I think, and started with self-publishing and then started submitting to third-party publishers once my kid was old enough that I felt I could commit to a deadline. Um, I am I'll design anything. So it's usually the the submission call that inspires me. So, sweaters, socks, accessories, shawls, blankets, whatever they're interested in, I usually come up with something.
I love that. I haven't done submission work myself, but I have read over a number of the calls, and my kids are still on the younger side. So committing to deadlines is hard when you spend your,
Yeah.
half your day running carpool for teenagers. Um, but my understanding of what I've seen is sometimes there will be a theme for a submission call, or as far as like inspired by this type of nature or this, part of the world, or sometimes it's kind of project based.
Yeah, that's right. It can really run the gamut.
And Celine, I see you next.
Hi, my name's Celine Phaeton, and I'm originally from Belgium, but I currently live in Draper, Utah. We moved here about a year ago from Colorado, so I see some people from Colorado and Utah, so hi. Um, for me, I get really nerdy about fit and construction, so I'm always trying different construction styles and different ways to get all kinds of things to fit our bodies, because I think in the past, a lot of patterns were kind of rectangular and kind of assuming that we're more flat, and we're really not. There's so many different angles and different ways that our bodies are shaped, and like that's our torso, our feet. So that's kind of what I get really excited about. So I'm always trying out new things, and I like really focusing on finishing details. So you'll see a lot of that kind of thing in my patterns.
Oh, I love that. I'll just quickly touch on who I am. So I'm Jessica A's. I am the designer behind Double the Stitches, the host of the Stitch Society membership, and your host for the summit. Mostly my designs are accessories. I do enjoy designing things that are a little bit, not a super quick win, but sometimes, that 1 or 2 skein kind of project. I'm not a 5 skein fingering weight shawl knitter, so I don't tend to design, large scale projects like that, but I do have a couple of blankets to my name. And yeah, I've been designing for, I don't even know, like six-ish years, 7 years, and have, a wide range of different accessory types of patterns, cowls, hats, shawls, things like that. And I also love to focus on learning something new, like Jen mentioned and others mentioned. I want to learn something new because it keeps my creativity going. It keeps my brain moving. If I just designed like tubular cowls that were always, 22 or 24 inches and just drop a pattern in there, which there's nothing wrong with that, but my brain needs more, I feel like, to be invested in the design. And I love that knitting gives the opportunity for lifelong learning, because there's always a different type of construction. There's always a different way to do a stitch. There's always a different type of stitch. I'd never heard of brioche cables until Jen pitched that idea as a topic. We were going to do a different brioche topic, and then she, I've really been leaning into these brioche cables, and I can't wait to explore that more. So I love learning. I love teaching people new things through designs, and that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from. And so I'm wondering about the rest of our designers here. Where do your design ideas come from if you didn't share yet? Do they come from nature, texture, color, emotion, or something else? I will say sometimes I retrofit an inspiration story. Sometimes it comes from what I'm thinking or feeling as I'm knitting the pattern. Like I will start with a swatch of a pattern that I'm enjoying knitting, because if I don't enjoy knitting the swatch, then I am not going to make other people knit the whole thing out of that. So I start about that, start with swatching, and then the swatch doesn't always evoke an inspiration for me, but I'll be thinking about something as I'm going through the project. And that's a lot of times where the inspiration for me comes from family and just life in general. Sometimes nature, sometimes, knitting on the beach where I used to live or near the beach or spending time, in different parts of my life. So what about the rest of you designers? I see Jen.
Yeah, so I have kind of two things that I do in my designs, right? That I really love brioche and cables, and I love, like more classic brioche patterns that have like the increase decrease shaping. So those like I think lend themselves really, really naturally to more like botanical themes. So I do a lot of like leaves and flowers and things because like the way the stitches branch when you do your increases and decreases just is so similar to the way you get separations in vines and in leaves and in that sort of thing. So that's one source of inspiration for me. But a lot of my cable work, and I saw somebody asked in the comments about this sweater. This is my newest sweater pattern. It's called the Euphoria pullover, spelled EWE, Euphoria. Um, and this is one of my designs that is really heavily inspired by like classic cable motifs. And I love looking at like the ways that people have done, for instance, Aran sweaters or other, very traditional cables and seeing how can I put the brioche spin on this. And some of them can be interpreted that way and some of them can't. But like I'm seeing like a motif on Celine's sweater, the cable with the seed stitch inside, and that is what inspired the central motif on my sweater is like that very classic motif. So that's something I like to use a lot in my process.
Can't really see anything right at the moment, so all I
Oh,
can do is look.
um, and I see Beth.
Yeah, I think there's a dyer that I collaborate with a lot. And so she's always got really interesting themes for her yarn. And so when I pick the yarn from her, I usually draw on what she drew on in order to create her colors for the designs. And then the other stuff I'll do is just based on what I want and what I don't see other people doing. So I have most of my shawls double as like a lap blanket for travel. And so you can wear them and you don't need to take up luggage space with them, but then you can be nice and cozy on the plane or whenever you get to your hotel or whatever. And so I do a lot of stuff that's basically like, what do I want? And then what is inspiring somebody that I work very closely with and enjoy working with. Because we kind of get along really well and blend our personalities when we're working together. So
Yeah, that's the joy of collaborating with someone with similar, creative styles and views and stuff is
yeah,
inspiring, I think, for me too. And
yeah.
Crystal's puppy.
Sophie always likes to be like right in the thick of things.
My cat's
Um,
the same.
yeah, yeah, just like she jumped in my presentation too. So, but for me, inspiration comes a lot from nature and architecture too. I I've always had kind of a passion for architecture, and so I when I see like the different lines and shapes in that, I'm drawn to that, and I think that rolls into a lot of the colorwork shapes or some cabling in that for me. And then another thing that I love to do is walk around like furniture stores and like rug shops and fabric, like not so much fabric, but like a crate and barrel, for example, or something like that. I draw so much inspiration from home goods and furniture and things like that. So more so than like clothing and regular fashion. I pull more from our home interior area. So that's kind of like my jam for things. And like Beth, I love a plain blanket shawl. I fly a lot, and so that's like the thing that I'm always searching for in my own go-to thing too is like, what can I bring that won't take any space up in my luggage? That's going to be super useful on the trip. So it's a great piece to have in the wardrobe.
And
Um,
Celine?
yeah, so kind of like Beth, for me, a lot of times it's gaps in my wardrobe
Mm.
that I'll be like, "Oh, I really wish I had a camisole, like whatever, to wear under this particular cardigan, or I wish I had a cream cabled sweater, or, things like that. But I'm like, I have this idea of what I want to wear, and then it goes from there. And then, like Crystal, I get a lot of inspiration when I'm out and about, but not with furniture. For me, it's more like ready to wear clothes that I'll see like little details and I'm like, wow, I wonder how they did that. And I know that it's made with machines, but like I'll see the shaping in a collar and I'm like, oh, that's really different. I haven't seen that before. And then I'll try to figure out how to do it myself. Or like I'll see techniques on Instagram of people doing things in a way I haven't done before. And then I want to try it out. And I try to see how I can incorporate that into a design. So it's kind of like a lot of different things are coming together.
Yeah, I like that. And Holly?
Yeah, a lot of what you said, Celine, very much sounds like my approach. And then added to that, always in the background, my mind is thinking and churning over ideas. If I'm grocery shopping or whatever I'm doing, I take a lot of stalking photos of fashion on the streets. Um, when my kid was younger, it was really easy. I'd go, Hannah, stand there. I'm going to take a picture of you. And I'm not taking a picture of her. I'm just taking a picture of the person on the other, you know, behind her, right? And so my camera roll is full of really disparate things. It could be anything from these stocking photos to the pattern, the tire pattern in the snow. After a car drove over some fresh snow, or the wake behind a ferry, and it reminds me of lace, or just anything and everything. I like to say I see the world through knit-colored glasses.
And so when you have these inspirations on the go, besides stalking photos, what do you do? Does anyone, keep a sketchbook or make voice notes to yourself? How do you capture ideas when that random inspiration strikes? So you're not sitting at your desk trying to come up with an idea. I think many of us, don't do that. I think at least for myself as a creative person, I also, see the world, like Holly said, through knit colored glasses. And I'm always looking for like, how can I incorporate something? So I take a lot of pictures. I leave myself notes. I have like a Notion document that I can add to from my phone. And I also have a separate one. For me, pattern naming is one of the hardest things. And so I have just a document of words that could be used for pattern names. And they don't necessarily fit with a specific inspiration yet, but because I have such a hard time coming up with a special name because there's so many patterns out there, right? You know, and so I'm always looking for like, then can I connect this word or feeling that I have in my pattern name inspiration file with some other picture or note that I've left for myself? But how do the rest of you do that? How do you capture your inspiration when it's random?
I have a notebook that is graph paper. And so I chart my colorwork designs on graph paper before I put them into Stitch Fiddle or anything like that. And so I just have the notebook with me and I'll start like coloring in boxes and trying to figure out how it's going to work on actual stitches. And I do the same thing with pattern namings because I loathe that. So I will ask friends for names. I'll ask testers what they would call something. And then I will stick it all in a document and then come back to it when I have a pattern that I need to name. And that way I can just kind of go through the list and see what name works best with either the colorway that I chose or the stitch pattern. Um, and I find that makes my life much easier and much less stressful when it comes to the kind of like, I consider the name the last thing I do. So, So it's like if I can get everything else done and then go back to the list, I feel much more comfortable with, wrapping things up.
Yeah, that is the last thing for me also. Sometimes I will crowdsource that part, and post in my community, or social media or whatever, and say like, this is my next pattern. It's almost ready to share with my test knitters, but it doesn't have a name. And what can we name it? And so sometimes I'll get great ideas. That's what happened with the coaster for the challenge, the amazing mosaic coaster. Someone said it kind of reminds me of a maze, and it just kind of snowballs, like taking from a little bit of inspiration to give it a name. What about you, Crystal?
I keep a sketchbook and I always do like a sketch of different things and for that's where I keep most of my ideas and I will plan out kind of a plan of like what I want to do for the next 6 months, but I may not ever really do what I want to do for the 6 months. That's just kind of what I'm thinking of at that time. I kind of free flow depending on what my mood is. Unless I'm collaborating with another yarn dyer or something like that, then obviously there's a timeline in place where we have to stick. We've made a plan, we're going to launch this in February of 26. So then I do stick with that. But if it's something that I'm just doing on my own, it's kind of a free flow. So I just kind of go with that sketchbook and I sketch out I will draw a model, sketch out how it might fit on somebody, and then I have a bunch of colored markers, which are actually here next to me. And then I play with colors to see how it would work. But then like my charting and like the cabling, I do all of that in a program called Stitch Mastery. And I start from there in the beginning, and then that's where I sit and play with it, and then I'll swatch it and then decide if I like it or not and then I go back and tweak things from there. And that may be more cumbersome than what Beth does as far as charting it out um on a actual grid paper. I don't know. I've not done it that way, but I have always done it through the chart through the technology piece of it. So but yeah, that's kind of how I keep track of it and actually name. It's funny you all say you don't like naming. That's my favorite part of it. But that probably goes back to the days of back way many years ago. I worked for GE Healthcare, and part of my job in marketing was naming medical equipment. So I would be in a room and with a bunch of other people, and we'd be whiteboarding it constantly, coming up with names. So that was kind of like one of my favorite things to be able to do. So it's like, ooh, it's like going back in time to be able to do that again and come up with fun names. So I enjoy that. So come to me if you ever want to bounce ideas off of things.
I was just gonna say, I feel like Crystal just gave us an invitation to email
Yeah.
her. Here's a picture of my design. What should I call it?
I'm
Right.
writing down your contact information right now.
Yeah.
And Celine,
Um,
did I call on you yet?
yeah, for me, I do everything on my iPad. So I use Procreate to sketch the design, and then I use Apple Numbers, which is like their version of Excel, to make my charts. Like you can download a Stitch font, and then I just use that. And I like that because sometimes my charts include a lot of shaping, and so there'll be like really weird shapes, which I feel like might be kind of harder to do in like the software that already exists.
Mm.
That's just kind of how I like to do it. And I keep track of my notes and like how much ease I want in different places on my sketch. And then I take photos of the inspiration that I've gotten, and then I can just import that into Procreate to make it kind of easier to really see what I'm doing. Naming, same.
Same.
That's my nemesis. Everything will be done. It'll go to the tech editor like TBD cardigan or something.
Yes, I've sent many messages to, halfway through the tech editing process and said, this is now called blah blah blah. or it starts with, mosaic shawl or, mosaic cowl, and then eventually I land on a name. And so then we have to update the footer and the file name and, all the other stuff relating to it. And what
Yeah.
about you, Holly?
Well, when it comes to naming, I hire somebody for that. I finally broke down and just hired a copy editor to help me with names and my romance language, that little paragraph at the beginning, because I just struggled over those for years. And early on, when I was submitting designs to publications, I would name them and then they would change the name. And I thought, why did I spend like an hour, searching all over the internet for ideas or whatever I'd done, right? Or sometimes more than an hour just to figure out a name. And so I stopped naming things and called them very descriptive things like you, Jessica. And then I had one publisher who actually published Belted Coat. I was like, oh, I thought you were going to name it, So I've got this pattern called Belted Coat. And of course, I didn't find out till after it was in print, so it wasn't anything I could do about it at that point. Um, and then as far as keeping track of my ideas, I don't have a sketchbook, which is kind of funny because I went to art college and I have all those sketchbooks still. Um, I I keep track of everything through photographs for the most part, and I have a picture morgue, like an archive of photos that everything's grouped in, like cable ideas, lace ideas, hat ideas, whatever. Just pure inspiration. I don't know what this image that I've come across will inspire yet, but I really liked, the juxtaposition of this shape and this shape and this color. It could have been a quilt design. It could have been um, a leaf overlaid with a footprint. I don't know. Like it could be anything, right? That sort of piques my curiosity. I shop for patterns in stores. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I shop for stitch patterns in stores. I mean, I love my stitch dictionaries, but I just when my husband and I like going to factory outlet malls. And I'm usually not really wanting to buy anything, but I love looking at the fabrics or the silhouettes. And that's where I get a lot of my ideas. I'll sketch ideas on a scrap piece of paper and then I'll take a picture of it so it lands in my archive eventually. Most of this, I've got a couple years worth of things I haven't archived yet on my phone, but I'll get around to that.
And what about you, Jen?
So I'm on team I hate naming things. And I also hate writing the romance. The number of times things have finished tech editing with just the word romance on the front page of the pattern. Um, so for pattern naming, I procrastinate that to the end. My default language is I name it after the yarn, right? So it's yarn company shawl or whatever. Until it comes up with a real name. And then if I really cannot figure it out, my sort of two default categories for names are bread related things, because brioche is named after the bread. And I'm a bread baker. So I have a number of patterns that are bread themed. And then, or leaning into the science side. So I do scientific names of, if something was inspired by a certain kind of plant, then I look up the scientific name of that plant and then see if there's something I can play with that to get the name. And then in terms of on the other side, I am not someone who's ever really liked drawing and sketching. And so are there a few sketches in my notebook? Yes. But generally what's in my notebook is a pencil line drawing that took me 15 seconds so that I could have a very vague reminder of what I was thinking of. The only time I do more detailed sketches is if I'm working with a collaborator and they really want to know ahead of time what I'm going to do before I start. and then I will force myself to draw to try and communicate the idea to somebody else. But I often find that for me, like the act of drawing it feels like it restricts my creative process, and I'm very creative on the needles. So I do a lot of like having a general idea of what I want something to look like, and then I need to just start swatching and just start playing with it, and I might do a whole bunch of versions. I also sort of have two approaches to my creative process, and in one um I like have a very clear idea of what I want something to look like, and I know right away, and then I like see the inspiration and I just have to pick up needles and just start swatching it. And then it's the ones that like those are the easy ones. I can get those projects out pretty fast. It's when I'm like, I want something that's generally inspired by this photo or this idea or whatever. And that might sit in the back of my head and marinate for like 2-3 years before that actually becomes something. Like this sweater was one of those. And literally I have a swatch that is 8 inches wide and 6 feet long, as I had this vague plan of what I wanted it to look like and just kept iterating over and over different stitch patterns to get there. Um, and so for those, like, yes, I have photos or like little sketches or things like that, but like it's a lot of like put something down somewhere so that I'll come back across this and be reminded of this idea at some point, but I just need to let things churn in the back of my head while I do something else until this vague sense sort of solidifies into something. And I feel like that's not a super helpful thing to be like, look, this is my process, but it just sort of has to sit for a while for me sometimes.
Yeah, I think we were touching a little bit on sketching and things like that, and I had taken a class to learn how to grade garments, to grade sweaters for different sizes. And like the first week of the class, because this was like a multi-week process, because that's a really big topic, was all right, everyone's going to make sketches of like a bunch of different ideas to pull from, and then you narrow it down and all of that. And that was the hardest part for me. I can't, I don't. I find that very difficult. But there is a question in the Q&A box from Martha. Martha is a budding designer who gets overwhelmed with grading garments because it's so much work, and also that it's only good for the size chart that you're using. People still need to alter for their perfect fit. So as designers, are we doing something to empower the person working the pattern to understand how to alter for themselves? For example, where in the pattern they could add or remove length, where they could insert darts or add or decrease width for their body. Anyone want to touch on that?
So I just want to say that I know people normally consider this a garment thing, but I do this with the smaller accessories as well. So for socks, I have a ton of tips in all of my patterns that indicate where you can make adjustments that are going to make a sock fit better, which I think a lot of people look at a sock and they're like, oh, one size fits all. And it's absolutely not one size fits all. And even scarves and shawls will vary how they look on a body depending on how big or small that person is. So you want to give people options on, length or width, how many skeins you want to use to achieve that, because it's just not going to be the same.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
like
same.
same with cowls too. Like
Mhm.
even those, I always try to include in my patterns like the instructions like okay, and it might be intuitive to some people, but there's a lot of beginner knitters too, and I want to make that's one thing I try to focus too on my patterns is like making it accessible to everyone, no matter what skill level you are at. But like a cowl, if you're working in multiples of 4 or 8 or 6 or 12, this is what you need to do to be able to adjust that size and make the circumference if you need to make it wider or narrower, depending on if it's for a kid or your size or, you want it a little bit bigger or baggier or, and then same with the length too. And that, so like for accessories, like what Beth does too, even with shawls, making those, just giving guidance more so, not saying this is exactly what you have to do, but just providing that guidance of what you can do.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
in garments, that too, it's guidance of, all right, adding bust starts. These are, I have in all of my garments, there's a full page of this is why you would add bust starts. This is why you might need it or why you might not need it. This is how you measure to figure out if you're going to want to use them or not, and then how you would step by step, this 10-step process of what you need to do and how you would then go through and adjust your pattern to add them. And then there's a big section in there. Okay, if you need to, if you're going to use bust starts, this will be the area of where you're going to start to consider where you're then going to want to figure out where you're going to add them in that pattern. And each pattern's different depending on the construction, whether it's bottom up or top down, whether it's a cardigan or a pullover and all of those different things. So there's a lot of different factors in that. But yeah, like there's lots of different ways to be able to provide that guidance and for short rows and length and arms and your bust, I mean not your bust, but your bicep, your arm circumference too. So yeah, there's
I
all
do
kinds.
exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Like everything, it's the same thing. It's like instead of including it all at the end, it's right where you would work it for bust darts, or if you're going to want to add some extra width to the front, just make maybe you have like narrower shoulders or you have a large bust, and then maybe in addition to bust darts, you also want vertical bust darts just to add with some width. Or maybe if you're tall and you want to add length, it'll say, okay, here's where you want to add length. Um, and then at the end of my patterns, I usually include a little modification section for like more fine tuning type things.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's just body shaping. Other times it's, if you want a yoke that's not as deep, here's what you can do, things like that. I like to include that in the pattern, and then I always have my email address and very upfront, like if you want help making modifications, email me, and that's in all my patterns. And I think you guys do something similar, right? Like that's what we're there for.
Yeah, I do. And, in a simple accessory, like Crystal touched on things like cowls, just giving people that information. And yes, maybe someone more advanced could figure it out from looking at the chart and what box is, where the repeat is, but not everyone is looking at the chart and just saying, even the mosaic coaster, a coaster, a little practice piece I included. This is a multiple of 10 stitches plus 3. So we cast on 23, but that gives people the information because I use DK. Maybe they want to use Aaron, or they want to use, well, Aaron, you need the repeat in the middle. But if they want to go down to fingering weight yarn, and sometimes even just giving people, empowering them with that information for something even as simple as, a little 4-inch coaster, is just, I think, really a kindness, I think, as a designer, to not keep that simple information like this is a repeat of these stitches. This is, how you can adjust it for something basic like a cowl. And Jen, I see you are also muted.
Yeah. I try to put in as much of this as I can to like help people if they do want to make modifications. I just put out a hat pattern that's like, okay, I have multiple sizes that literally are just adding or subtracting repeats, and then saying, okay, if you want, I made the biggest size and the smallest size, and they both fit on my head, but they fit very differently. So if you want a beanie fit, add repeats or subtract repeats. If you want a slouchy fit, put it, do this way. Trying to give things like that. It's definitely a pain point for me in writing some of my garment patterns because I want people to be able to do any modifications that they want. But if you're doing, a pattern that is not a simple repeat, then starting to do things like adding bust arts becomes a lot more tricky because you're working over something that you can't just fill in, oh, here's a 4-row repeat. So fitting that in is much harder in some of my designs. And so I feel like I'm much more on the side of like, when there is a very straightforward, you can make a mod by doing this, I put it in, and then I'm very, very open to anyone who wants to make adjustments to just, shoot me a message and say, how would I do this, and then I can help on a much more like case by case basis rather than, I almost would have to give you like my full grading spreadsheet to get you into some of the nitty gritty. And that can be overwhelming for people in a pattern as well. So for me, it's this balancing act of like, how much do I give you, how to modify while not overwhelming you with really technical things.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, right?
Yeah.
There was a question in the chat that I had and lost, and I'm looking for it, but the chat is going. Why do you, as a designer, chart versus providing a text pattern? I'll say for me, the struggle that I had as a newer knitter who didn't understand charts yet, the first time I looked at, I think it was a Katia pattern. So they said like cast on 100 stitches, follow chart A, then chart B. And that was the pattern. Like there was no written instructions. And that just like blew my mind as a new knitter. Like, what do you mean? So my vision in my own pattern writing is that if there is a chart, it's a supplemental additional piece of information, but that I'll always give written instructions and the supplement of the chart, because sometimes like someone was answering them in the chat, because sometimes the chart does give a better representation of what's happening, and sometimes the written instructions can get very long to explain something that is much simpler to understand looking at the chart, at the diagram. But I'd love to know your vision on charts versus written and all of that. Holly?
Well, I definitely provide both because well, we all have brains that process information differently, right? So some people are really visual and the chart really tells them all they need to know. But other folks have a really hard time navigating that chart. So then that's where the written instructions come in. Or even just following the first two rows of a chart alongside the written instructions to make sure, oh yeah, okay, I see how this symbol actually means this. And so it's, I provide both so that as more people can, so it's accessible to more people, basically.
And Celine?
So I already kind of commented that, yes, I think that sometimes a chart can represent it visually better, especially like for color work. I don't think there's really any way to get around a chart in that case. Like you can write it out like, okay, knit one in C2, knit one in C1, but then you're getting like these super long instructions, and I think it'll get really cluttered very quickly. And I think that can happen if there's a lot of shaping happening. Like right now, I'm working on something that it's got lace just kind of at the top, and then the neckline shaping is worked, and you're you're still working in lace. And so there's new lace being started here. And I might write out that portion of the chart, but because it's in so many sizes, that chart document is going to be really long, really, really long, because each size, sometimes I can condense charts. Sometimes I can make like multiple sizes share a chart somehow, and it's just the edge stitches that are different. Here, I can't do that. So it's, yeah, sometimes a chart is just the easiest way and most concise way of conveying that information.
Crystal?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the same. Holly and Celine have really covered, and yourself too, have covered it, try to include both in most every case. I do I do have a handful of patterns that are for low vision, and some of them are color work, and so they are written out. They're probably like 30 pages. So they are written out with the, knit one, C2, knit one, how it is. But I don't have a ton, but the ones that are like my most popular patterns, so that those are available to everybody. But like you, Jessica, I'll never forget. I was a brand new knitter, and this was probably, I haven't been knitting for all that long, only like 13 years. And um I pulled out I had I think it was a line of magazine, and there was this beautiful pattern in there, and their charts, like it's like one tiny little chart, and there's no instructions, and I had no idea what I was doing. So it's like you said, cast on, whatever, make all these increases, and you're working on this beautiful shawl, and then you get to this wonderful part where there's this beautiful cable pattern and these little flowery things. And it's like this little section. And I'm like, how the heck does this work? Like, there's zero instructions, and I had no idea. Thankfully, I have a yarn shop in town, so I could go talk to them. But I probably spent a whole Sunday trying to figure it out because I was like, I have no idea how to do this. And, as a newbie. So, like you, I do try to include in my patterns now, like, at the very beginning of any charted section, you're going to work this chart, X number of times across the pattern or the color work piece across that, so that it's 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 for a beginner knitters. I just try. I remember all the things I struggled with when I first started knitting, even like learning how I didn't know how to knit in the round. So funny story. I will tell everybody this. This is like my most embarrassing thing that I did when I was knitting. The Gaptastic cowl I took with me on a trip to China, and I just learned how to knit, but I didn't know how to knit in the round. And I was like, this is such a cool pattern. I'm going to take this with me. It's chunky yarn. It'll be perfect for the plane ride. I got 13 hours, 20 some hours, whatever it was on the plane. And I'm like, this will be a great project. Well, so I take it. All I knew how to do was knit back and forth, but I knew how to knit and purl, so I could do the moss stitch. Well, I got the whole thing done on the trip, but I had no clue I was supposed to be knitting it in the round. I guess I didn't read the instructions correctly. So, anyways, I got it all finished, and then I seamed where mattress stitched it in the end and brought it back to the store, and it was hilarious because they were like, "What did you do?" I'm like, "Well, I finished it. I got a brand new cowl." They're like, "No, you didn't do it right at all." So then I finally learned how to knit in the round. But I guess that was one of like many mistakes that I made in my venturing of learning how to knit the first few years. And from that, I was like, every pattern, when I decided that I was going to design. I was like, I'm going to make this so that anybody, no matter if you just picked up needles for the first time, whether you want to knit a sweater for the first time or a cowl or a hat or whatever, I'm going to have everything in here so that you can do it successfully. And so that's always been my goal with everything. And hopefully, I think that's worked so far for many people. And so, yeah, it's just how can we make this so that it's fun? You don't want to have those bad experiences because bad experiences can be frustrating and then you don't ever want to go. Sometimes you never pick it back up again, and we don't want that. So, because it's such a wonderful, wonderful art for us to be able to do. So,
Well, I think your version of the Gaptastic Cowl was probably your first design because you did it your way.
yeah, right. Totally.
So, however it came out, that was something different and unique, and I think you should go back and publish it.
Right.
Beth, I see you, and then Jen, and then I have one more question because we're getting closer to the top of the hour, but it's a big question from Martha.
Oh, okay. So I include both, but it's because I can only knit from written instructions. Um, I can't knit from charts at all. Never have been able to, don't know why. But I know people that can only knit from charts because they're dyslexic or any other number of reasons. And so I will go through and sit there and struggle through making the chart. If it's color work, it's no problem because I already like graph papered it out. And that's why I do it on graph paper before I put it into a program. But yeah, I include them both because I just know that it's really difficult to not. And like even color work, I can't use a color work chart. Even though I make them, I will make so many mistakes. So I make sure that everything is easier for everybody by making everything in there. But I do want to say, like, I think a lot of people will see designs that only have a chart or only have written instructions and think that the designer is lazy. And I don't think it's lazy. I think there's a preference there, and you design how you knit and you think how you knit. And so some people just don't think through the second step. And I don't want people to think that like some designers are lazy for this. I think it's really just like we didn't think it through, or this is how my brain works and I don't understand the other at all. Um,
Yeah, I think the same that there are knitters who learn differently. I think that applies to designers as well, who process
yeah.
information differently. And yeah, so kudos to you for struggling, fighting your way through to try to accommodate everyone. That's
I did it because I had a friend who was dyslexic reach out. And so that was what made me think it through. So I think not everybody has somebody in their lives that's willing to like have that conversation with them because it can be a little awkward.
well, good for your friend for advocating for themselves and reaching
Yeah.
out to get help where they needed it. And Jen?
Um, so I'm with similar to Celine in that I try whenever possible to include both written and charted instructions. But there are times when for me it is just not practical to be doing written instructions. And I'll be honest, I can't afford to pay my tech editor what it would cost to edit the length of the novel that would be written out for some of my charts to be as written instructions. For example, my Braintree shawl, which um, this Zoom is not fully showing it, but there's a big brioche tree that literally doesn't have a single repeat in the entire thing. So it's organic branching, every row is different. And it's page after page after page of charts to make that happen. I also have a 1 paragraph description that I don't think anyone will ever write up or will ever knit that is, here is how I did this. So you could just not follow the pattern at all and do it organically. But to write it out row by row would be probably 100 pages. And I can't realistically do that. So there are times when I just can't. But I'm trying very hard whenever possible to put both. And then I'm very, very clear in my pattern pages that I say whether it has written instructions or it's just charts. Because occasionally it's just not, I just can't.
Yeah, I think you do what you can. But I agree that, and this sort of segues into Martha's question, that sometimes it's not sustainable as a pattern designer with what people are realistically willing to pay for a pattern. There has to sometimes be a cutoff or a limit of this is how much I can put into this pattern. And that doesn't make it wrong. It's just sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Sometimes for whatever reason, it doesn't make sense to include um, both. So Martha's question was about pricing. I said it was a big question. And she's wondering, she says, people don't seem to be willing to pay for all the work that goes into a pattern. So how do we tackle this? Are we doing anything to educate people in the cost it takes to make a pattern or to educate designers in pricing a pattern? So I think it's very hard to police to educate designers in pricing a pattern. People are going to charge what they feel comfortable charging, and there's a lot of factors sometimes that goes into that decision. Sometimes it's just a newer designer is looking at it more as a hobby, and they're like, oh, if I get $3 for this pattern, like that's wonderful. And those of us who are giving all the information about how to adjust this and where to put bust darts and writing out all the instructions and giving all of the charts and all of those things, it becomes a very different thing than here's like a short 1 page written, here's how I did this. And so it's kind of a different model of pattern writing, I think. And so it's hard to tell other people's what they should charge for their work. And not that I've tried, but I feel like I have heard of other people trying to guide and it not going well. Because no one wants to be told and everyone has their reasons for why. So I think more as far as designers, in my opinion, we can do more to educate knitters about what is actually going into the pattern. And that's one of the things I love about having this panel, because all of us here are putting, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months, and sometimes that's a pattern that's marinating for years before we feel like it's ready to share with the world. And that, I think a lot of knitters don't really realize how much actually goes into a pattern. And I think, and Crystal, I think it was Crystal who, or someone, Celine touched on this earlier, that patterns used to be boxy and, square and rectangle and not have shaping and all of those things. And if you're putting less detail into a pattern, then that can also be, impacted in the cost. So I guess the question I have for you all is, are you doing anything to educate people in what it takes to make a pattern, or to educate designers in pricing a pattern? And also, I think that knitters don't know there's a lot of back end stuff, a lot of behind the scenes stuff that you don't see besides the cost of yarn, but there's the software and the newsletter subscriptions and the website tech and the tech editor's time and all of those things. So, are you doing anything to educate other people or other designers as far as pricing goes?
Well,
So, do you mind if I touch on this quickly?
yeah,
Just
go for
because
it.
this is, I'm very passionate about this, and this may be a little bit controversial, but at the end of the year in December, I release all my numbers to my newsletter subscribers. So I tell them exactly how much I sold. I tell them, like, on different platforms, which patterns did best, and like my thoughts on why. I talk about all my costs, so tech editing, yarn sport for test knitters. Um, yeah, just like you said, the website, MailerLite, everything. I put all of that in my newsletter. So at the end of the year, you can see, like, okay, maybe I'm taking home 50% of what I sold, something like that, right? And it's interesting to see year over year where my costs are changing. In my first year, I didn't have that many costs because I was basically just paying for tech editing. I wasn't offering yarn support. I didn't have my own website. And so as you grow, there's more and more costs that can involve, like, fixed costs. So I raised my prices 1 or 2 years ago, and I think I'm going to keep them where they are. But I would never, like, go out and tell another designer how to price their patterns, because I think that's a very personal thing. And I do think that our time is worth something. I'm not going to charge you by the hour for how much time I spent, because some patterns I can, it's 2 weeks to write a hat or something, it's quick. And a garment, sometimes it's 2 years, and it kind of depends. So it's really, and there's some garments that come together a lot more quickly than others. Some that I'm like stumped a long time on how to get it to grade properly in different sizes and look proportional. So and I'm not charging you more for those patterns. I'm not charging you more for patterns that have a lot of options. So I think it depends on the designer and how they want to do things. But I do think that there's a lot of work and behind the scenes stuff that doesn't get seen.
And before, I just also wanted to mention that there are some designers with very, very, very large followings who can charge less for a pattern because everyone and their mother and their sister and their cousin are going to buy that pattern. So they can make a more sustainable living, still charging less for their patterns. And some patterns do better than others. Some you earn the money back right away. Sometimes it's, over time. Crystal, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I've always struggled with, well, there's two things. One, like what Celine was saying, an accessory is one thing, like that's easy. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to make. There's a little bit of grading with some of it. But your costs involved with that is a lot less than a garment. A garment has a lot of expense involved in it. And when I look at us designing, when designers design garments, I also look at it as I compare it to quilters and sewing designers. And to me, it's always blown my mind and baffled me how, and many of us are sewers and many of us are quilters, how we are so willing to go and pay $20 for a sewing pattern, or a quilting pattern and not blink an eye, not complain about it, and go and spend $200-300 on fabric to make that quilt or to make that garment. And yet we'll spend $200 or $300 on yarn, but yet we complain about spending $10 on a sweater pattern. And I don't get it. This is, it's a question I guess I've never asked my followers about it, or asked the Instagram world about it, but I guess why? Why is it such a big deal? Why are people not willing? Because you can read like a quilting pattern or like buying a dress pattern, you get every single size to be able to make all the different sizes over and over and over again. And with a sweater pattern, you get every single size to make over and over and over again for the rest of your life. And you get all the updates. I've yet to ever receive an update for a sewing pattern or a quilting pattern if there ever are one. So I guess I don't know. I mean, my question goes back to everyone else. Why? You tell me why you're not willing to do that. Because, and so everybody knows that's listening to this too. If us as designers, if we do outsource our photography, that's about can be anywhere from $100 to $300 a session. And that could be one piece or 10 pieces. It just kind of depends on how much you have going on. Your tech editing can be anywhere from 25 to $45 to an hour
per hour.
per
Yeah.
Yes,
hour,
that's very clear.
depending
Who
on
are you using?
the piece and who you're working with. And then that's just tech editing. So then if you don't do your own grading, then you also have grading on top of that per hour. So there's that too. And then there's your own personal time. And then if you're not gifted the yarn by an indie dyer or a yarn company, you're buying that yarn at full cost, just like each of you are buying your yarn. So there's all those other costs that are involved in that are coming out of our pockets too. We all love doing this, so it's like, I'm not complaining. I'm gonna do it. I love doing this, but there's all these different expenses that go into that just to make one thing, and that can be a cowl could cost $100 to design, and a sweater, roughly, and a sweater could cost up to $700 to design, depending on what size you're making. For myself, it's a good $800 to design a sweater, because I'm designing it for myself. So I'm spending that much money on the yarn to make sure that I can fit in, that it's going to fit me too.
And
So I don't know.
that's not necessarily what you're earning from that design. That's the
Oh
actual
gosh, no.
related
That's just my
time
cost.
put into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I just throwing that out. And yes, what Carla's saying, I totally get it. I've been burned too by a lot of designers out there too for writing crappy patterns. So I think everybody here that's on this panel, and I feel like everybody that's been part of this summit, I know all of them, and I've known many of them for a long time. They're all great designers, and I feel very confident about everybody that's been a part of this summit. You're going to be happy with their patterns. So, but yeah, I hear what you're saying too, Carla. It stinks when you spend $10 and you can't even knit the darn thing. So, anyway, sorry, I'm off my
That's
soapbox
okay.
now.
And I'm sorry, just to jump in real quick, and I know, and it's the discerning, but the difference is like with quilting, I can look at that picture, I can put it together, but when you're doing a sweater and you're following different techniques, it's a little, as you get better, you can kind of figure it out. But with the quilting, it was a lot different in the beginning than it was in the beginning with knitting. I just wanted to throw that out. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I was a new quilter in 2020 and I didn't know what I was doing either with that. So, yeah, I know. We're all learning at different stages too. So,
And Holly?
Well, I think a lot of the problem lies within the industry. Like publishers are not willing to pay us what we're worth for for patterns that we're writing for them to put in their magazine or their book. We're getting paid a pittance. The model gets paid more for that 1 day photo shoot. The makeup artist, the hairstylist gets paid more than your knitwear pattern designer got paid for. And these publications need the designs. I mean, it's not centered around how lovely the makeup is on the models, right? Their product is the design. When I first started submitting designs, publications like Vogue Knitting were still paying the same amount they had paid 20 years previous for a sweater design. And the whole time I worked with them, it was still the same until the last time they offered me 40% less for a design. So I kind of wrote back and I said, has your fee schedule changed? Well, I'll do it for that fee, but I want the rights to revert to me. Oh, and they don't let you get the rights back to your patterns, and I ended up burning my bridge with them because it just,
That's
I can't work with them if they're going to undercut me, anyways, sorry.
No, like going off of that, like there's a lot of does that like I read the terms really carefully and I don't
Mhm.
even bother to a lot of them even
Yeah,
submitting because it's the terms are so bad.
well, they are.
Which is
They
why I
are.
kind of just stick to independent
Yeah,
design.
and I think, they know that the next up and coming designer or next wannabe designer will be happy to work for those fees. And it's it's not such a feather in your hat to get published in their publications. I think most people don't actually notice the designers' names, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that among all of the different parts of the fiber industry that are involved, the designers I think are the ones that get paid the least, right?
Mhm.
The yarn distributor or the yarn dyer that is making money that way, or if it's a distributor going to a yarn store, they're making their portion of the yarn sales. Um, and like you said, the makeup artist and the model and the publication and all of the different pieces. And then there's the designer, but none of those things would exist if it wasn't for the design.
Exactly.
The design sells the yarn, the design sells the magazine. People pick up the idea to knit something. People sometimes we just buy yarn because it's pretty. I mean, I can't say that that's not true, but a lot of times you're buying yarn because you have a vision in mind. You want to make that sweater or that shawl or that hat, and you have a specific vision in mind of what you'd like to create. And the design is the basis for the engine that sells the yarn. So yeah, it can be frustrating.
Hmm.
What would you
Oh,
like to share?
sorry, I have another story about within the industry. So, back when we could wholesale our patterns, when that still existed, the wholesale market has just died since Ravelry. But um, I had a distributor, and this was early on, and a kind designer had pulled me aside, a mentor, and said, Holly, you've underpriced your patterns a bit, so you really should raise them. So I did, and that distributor did not like that. And I had sent out emails, and I'd even said, order in advance of, told them when I was going to do it, and you'll get it for the old price, but you could charge for the new price. And anyways, they didn't read the emails. They got the bill from me, and they had a fit. They were all upset that I'd raised my prices and returned the patterns. And what else? There was something. Oh, and then went on a tirade. I would get a new email every 5 minutes. Oh, and one more thing. If you think you're going to sell the same number of patterns at this price, new price, and she just went on and on and on and badmouthed me to the shops that she repped before. It was just awful. So, I mean, this is kind of what we have to contend with, right? No one else has ever said anything a peep about my prices anytime I raise them, except for that one person early on.
We're still in the tea here.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I think
Anyways,
there's
she no longer has a business because, as I say, the wholesale business market just dropped.
Yeah, it really has. Jen?
oh, I was just gonna say there's also this history that we're contending with, that in this industry, patterns have been treated as sort of this like afterthought add-on, that like you buy the yarn and pattern comes free with yarn purchase, and the pattern is
Right
the
on the
thing being
label,
used
right?
to sell the yarn. It's not an independent thing of value on its own. And so we have like decades of history of this being how yarn companies promoted their products, devaluing the designer, that we are now having to fight in sort of this consumer mindset, that even if people wouldn't consciously say, oh, I don't think patterns have any value, although there are people who refuse to pay for patterns, that, you know, it's still ingrained, it's still back there, this idea that like, oh, but I could just get a free pattern, or I could buy the magazine that has, you know, 20 patterns in it for, you know, so the per pattern price is less. And so we've culturally devalued a product, and now we have to fight back against that to tell people like, we are putting in so much more work now than what was expected for those patterns years and years ago, and you're asking for more and more and more from a designer, but you still don't want to pay for it. And so there's some amount of like trying to shift the mindset of knitters to recognize what's going on, that maybe it is okay to spend a little bit more for those patterns. And also, you know, as you said with the economy of scale thing, that, you know, they also see, oh, but the big name sells for so much less. It's like, well, right, but if they're going to sell 5,000 copies on the first day, they can afford to, whereas we can't.
Yeah, I want to get to Beth, but before that, Elke, I think, has had their hand up for a while. Did you have something you wanted to share or ask?
Yes, yes, thank you. I know we are running out of time. Um, I'm from Germany, so excuse if I'm looking for words sometimes. Um, I just wanted to say, as a consumer, I knitted 30, 40 years ago, then stopped and started now again. And 30, 40 years ago, the design was made in the magazines. You know, the designer made the creative part and sent the sweater, the beautiful sweater, and they made the charts and everything. And this has changed. Now you are doing all the work. You make the creative part and you make the charts and everything. And nobody wants to pay for it. This is what happened during 30 years. Now I came back knitting and see what you are doing for work nowadays. It's incredible. And I can only say my mother said she want a friend of her wants a pattern I had. And I said to her, yes, I can tell her where she can buy it because none of your patterns I would just give to someone. Because if it's $8 or €10 or anything, it's not much money. Thank you. I just wanted to tell you because I followed it like 40 years now. And this has changed dramatically. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for
Thank you.
sharing.
Yeah,
That means
Thank
a
you.
lot, Lucky. And Beth, and then I think we'll wrap up because we're past the hour, and I don't want to keep everyone too long. You have lots of sessions to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Elke actually said what I was going to say in a way. Like I have been knitting since I was a very small child, and I recently was sent a sweater I started when I was probably about 10 or 11 by my sister, who found it in an old trunk from my parents' house. And I thought, oh, I'll finish it. Why not? And I looked at the pattern and couldn't figure it out. Um, I was like, how did I knit this when I was so young? But there's no information in the pattern about how to actually knit the sweater. And also I can't fit it over my head, so it's not really worth finishing. But I looked at it and I thought, oh my goodness, the patterns way back when people were paying for patterns, had no information whatsoever. And now, as we've progressed, you know, even small accessory patterns like hats and scarves and cowls and socks will include, you know, not just one size or two sizes, but five sizes. And there will be options on how to do the decreases and how to do the increases and how to, you know, cast on and cast off and tutorials and all this stuff that just did not exist before. And that people are now expecting to be part of quality patterns that they're willing to pay for. And it's that expectation that I think it makes the I don't want to pay for your pattern the hardest to swallow, is because you're expecting us to put in so much more work than just designing something to be knit. You want us to be teachers, you want us to be videographers and photographers, and you want us to be able to like run a YouTube channel
And
or
dance on
whatever.
TikTok.
Yeah. And it's like there's so much other stuff that there's this expectation we're going to happily do while charging you $3 for a pattern. And I understand that patterns are expensive. Everything's expensive right now and everything's on a budget. But if you're going to expect people to go and put in so much extra work that doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the actual knitting, I think it's only fair that you would expect to pay for the pattern.
Yes, very well said, everyone. Yeah, it's a big topic. It's a touchy subject, I think, for a lot of people. And I think this was a really wonderful approach and conversation to, sharing our background with designing and the hard work and the things that go into creating those, sweater patterns graded for 9 or 11 sizes across a range from extra small to 6X and whatever, or even sock patterns that have many multiple sizes and the work that goes into it. So it's really been I think wonderful. I think it's been, as Michelle said in the comments, eye-opening that so many knitters don't understand, or they just don't know, they're just unaware, because it's not part of their life. All they see is that finished pattern, and they don't know everything that happens in the background. And one piece of advice I think I know knitters, many have been burned by bad, poorly written or incomplete patterns, is looking for patterns that have been test knit, patterns that say that they have been tech edited. And if you find a designer that you like how they explain things, then I think exploring the rest of their pattern catalog is another safe bet, because sometimes, we talked about size charts and things like that, where a pattern is written for a specific size chart. And so if you find a designer who writes for your body type, body shape, body size, that's another, way to continue. And yeah, designers including that information upfront in advance. Like Jen said, this pattern is, has parts that are only charted, or schematics and things like that can also help you make a decision as a knitter whether that's an investment that that you want to make. So we're going to wrap that up for now, though. So I appreciate all of our designers for coming and sharing their views, their information, their process, their creative their creativity and how you go about designing. And this has been really, really wonderful. If you missed part of it, this is should be on YouTube right now if you want to come back and watch it, and it will be added to the schedule page as a replay. And if you have the upgrade for the summit, the Happy Knitters Toolkit, or the extended access pass, as soon as I have the video, it will also be added to your classrooms. You'll have ongoing access and you can come back to do that. But what I should have said before I started all my talking was, if designers, if you want to share a link or two in the chat of where people can find you and check out your world, your designs, or your website, or your social media, whatever you'd like to share, feel free to share that over in the chat. And while they're doing that, the only other live event that's happening this evening is at 7 o'clock, there is a stitch session for those who have the Happy Knitters Toolkit and my Stitch Society members. The link is, someone was asking the link for the replay. The links later in the replay. I'll add the designers links below the video so that you can check them out. Thank you for asking that, Priscilla, and reminding me that I should definitely do that. Yeah, so thank you all again for being here, being part of the summit, for your energy, for your creativity, for joining me and our wonderful speakers and designers. And tomorrow we wrap up. We'll have a great big stitch session that everyone is invited to, and a call where I'll announce some of our prize winners up until that point, and the Stitch Society scholarship and all of that stuff. So take care, everyone. Thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.